There are stories in Hollywood that never die. Stories that live quietly behind the polished smiles, the studio lights, and the golden nostalgia of television's past. But among them all, few stories are as powerful, as heartbreaking, and as human as the one between Johnny Whitaker and Brian Keith. On screen, they were the perfect picture of family, the orphaned nephew and the reluctant uncle who grew to love him like his own. Off-screen, they were something far deeper, two souls bound by fate, each carrying their own pain, and each saving the other in ways neither would understand until it was too late. When Johnny first stepped onto the set of Family Affair, he was just a child, small, bright-eyed, and pure-hearted, the kind of kid who didn't yet know that the world he was walking into could take as much as it gave. Hollywood in the 1960s was a place of dreams and illusions, and Johnny was about to become part of that illusion. By the time most children were learning to read, he was memorizing scripts. While others were playing in the backyard, he was performing for millions. Yet what made him different wasn't just talent. It was the sincerity in his eyes, the vulnerability that audiences could feel through the screen. He didn't act, he felt, and people could tell. And then there was Brian Keith, the seasoned actor with the deep, commanding voice and quiet gravitas that filled every room he entered. To many, he was a Hollywood icon, the picture of strength, wit, and authority. But to Johnny, he became something else entirely. He wasn't just a co-star, Johnny would later say, he was a second father. It wasn't a rehearsed line, it was the truth. Brian wasn't the type to talk about emotions. He wasn't soft or sentimental. He was a man forged in another time, disciplined, private, a little rough around the edges. But underneath that toughness was a heart that recognized something fragile in the little boy standing beside him. Between takes, he'd joke, tease, or gently correct him. When Johnny missed a cue, Brian didn't scold, he guided. "Don't just say the words, kid, believe them," he'd tell him, his gravelly voice carrying both authority and tenderness. And Johnny did believe. He believed in the work, in the message, in the family they created together on screen. And most of all, he believed in Brian. But as the cameras rolled and the world fell in love with the warmth of Family Affair, a quiet reality lingered behind the curtain. Both Johnny and Brian were playing roles that mirrored their real lives more than anyone knew. Johnny's character, Jody, was a boy trying to find his place in a new world after loss. And in real life, Johnny was a child trying to find his place in a world that didn't always make sense. Meanwhile, Brian, who played the gruff but loving Uncle Bill, was himself a man searching for balance between the fame he had earned and the peace he could never quite find. It was art imitating life in the most haunting way. Johnny remembers the set as a second home. Between the sound of the cameras and the laughter of the crew, there was always Brian, steady, reassuring, a quiet giant who somehow made chaos feel safe. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. He carried himself with this quiet strength, Johnny once said. He didn't need to say much to make you feel cared for. But even as Brian was guiding a young boy through the wild world of show business, he was silently carrying the weight of his own invisible battles. Years later, Johnny would look back and see the signs, the weariness behind Brian's smile, the moments when his laughter didn't quite reach his eyes. He was a strong man, Johnny recalled, but sometimes you could feel the sadness in him. He carried a lot. That sadness, that quiet storm within, was something Johnny wouldn't fully understand until much later, when he faced his own. As Family Affair reached the height of its success, Johnny became one of the most recognizable faces on television. He was adored by millions, envied by many, and celebrated by the industry as the perfect child star. But behind that image was a boy who rarely got to be one. "People think fame makes you happy," he said, "but sometimes it takes away the parts of you that matter most." The show's schedule was demanding, the expectations endless, and the spotlight unforgiving. Brian, who had lived through the highs and lows of Hollywood himself, tried to shield Johnny from the worst of it. "He'd pull me aside sometimes," Johnny said. "He'd say, 'Remember who you are when the cameras stop.' At the time, I didn't understand. But now, I do." When Family Affair ended in 1971, everything changed overnight. The family that had existed so vividly on screen vanished. The set, once filled with laughter and warmth, went quiet. Johnny was a teenager now, Too old to be the cute child star, too young to be taken seriously as an adult actor. It was like the world forgot me, he admitted. One day, everyone wants you around. The next, you're invisible. It was the beginning of a long, painful silence that fame never prepares you for. Brian, meanwhile, continued working, his career solid, his reputation steady. Yet even he couldn't escape the shadow that fame casts when the applause fades. His body was aging, his health declining, and the battles he'd fought for years were wearing him down. He had this toughness about him, Johnny said, but sometimes toughness can turn into armor, and armor gets heavy. In the years that followed, Johnny and Brian's paths diverged, but the bond between them never disappeared. They would occasionally speak, exchange words of encouragement, or reminisce about the old days. He'd always ask if I was doing okay, Johnny recalled softly. He wanted to make sure I wasn't getting lost out there. But life has a way of testing even the strongest connections. Johnny was struggling, not just with the loss of his career, but with the deeper loss of identity that often comes after childhood fame. He fell into a darkness that few could imagine, battling addiction, loneliness, and the feeling of being forgotten by the very world that once adored him. I went through hell, Johnny admitted. There were times I didn't think I'd make it out. And yet, even in his worst moments, he would think about Brian, about that voice that once told him to believe, about the strength that came not from perfection but from endurance. Whenever I was at my lowest, he said, I'd hear his voice in my head, and it reminded me that even when you're broken, you can still fight. When the news came in 1997 that Brian Keith was gone, the world lost a Hollywood legend, but Johnny lost something much more personal. It shattered me, he said. I cried like I did when I was a kid, because for him it wasn't just about losing a co-star or a mentor, it was losing the man who had been his protector, his teacher, his moral compass. He wasn't just Uncle Bill, Johnny said through tears in one interview. He was my hero. But what Johnny didn't realize until years later was that grief has a strange way of reshaping people. In mourning Brian, he found a kind of strength he didn't know he had. He taught me how to keep going, Johnny said, even when it hurts, even when you feel like giving up. Those lessons, the same ones whispered on a set decades earlier, became the foundation of Johnny's rebirth. Over time, Johnny rebuilt himself piece by piece. He found purpose in helping others, speaking openly about addiction, recovery, and the emotional scars that fame leaves behind. He became a voice for those who felt lost in the darkness, the same darkness he had once known all too well, and through it all, he kept Brian's memory close. Everything I do now, he said, is a way of honoring him. He saved me more than once, and I never got to tell him that. Today, at 65, Johnny looks back not with bitterness but with gratitude. The pain, the loss, the silence, all of it shaped him into the man he became. I finally understand him, Johnny said quietly. Back then, I just saw a strong man. Now I see the human being he really was, someone who loved deeply, even when he didn't know how to show it. It's that understanding that inspired Johnny to finally tell the truth, not the gossip, not the rumors, but the real human story behind the legend. Because the truth about Brian Keith isn't found in the roles he played or the fame he earned. It's found in the moments no one saw. The hand on a young actor's shoulder, the quiet words of encouragement, the unspoken love that helped a boy survive the weight of Hollywood. Brian wasn't perfect. He had demons that eventually took him down. But in his imperfection, he taught Johnny the most important lesson of all. That strength isn't about never falling. It's about having the courage to stand back up, again and again. And maybe that's why their story still resonates today. It's not just a story about two actors or a TV show. It's a story about connection, the kind that outlives fame, outlasts pain, and survives even death. When Johnny speaks about Brian now, his voice carries the tenderness of a man who has lived, lost, and finally learned to forgive both the world and himself. He'll always be part of me, Johnny said. The lessons, the love, the memories, they never leave. They're part of my soul. In the end, Family Affair wasn't just a television show. It was a reflection of real life, messy, beautiful, and painfully human. Behind every line, every scene, there was truth. And now, at 65, Johnny Whitaker is finally ready to share it all. The truth about the man who taught him how to believe, the mentor who became his father in every way that mattered, and the love that never truly left him. Because behind the laughter, behind the fame, behind the curtain of Hollywood's golden age was a story of two hearts, one learning, one teaching, both breaking and both healing. And that's the truth Johnny Whitaker wants the world to finally hear.